story that the thing's in. Here's a more modern picture. Lebanon's very proud of this artifact. They excavated this whole area here, and you can see the extreme weathering on these things. These aren't 4,000 years old. These aren't even 6,000 or before even writing old. These are at the Pleistocene age. The Pleistocene is marked by a global die-off. If you're a paleontologist, you understand that the marks in geology actually are originating around die-offs, global die-offs. And geologists will agree that the Pleistocene age ended about 10,500 BC, or 13,000 years ago. This is part of what's called the Baalbek Trilithon. There's a little guy with a fez regarding this huge edifice. It's actually a foundation for a huge complex above it. And you can see there's little edges here broken off, that somebody had actually come back to this site after it had been destroyed, if it indeed had actually been built intact, and put these extra stones here and try to actually rebuild it again. But these things are about a level of two-story house, the top, and they're a little bit lighter, about 1,200 tons. And here's a wider picture of the Trilithon. And these are two guys standing above it. Its enormity is stupefying. If you actually get a chance to go here, which you probably wouldn't because the Hezbollah have a big training camp right here now, but if you could actually go here, you couldn't comprehend it. It is just such a large structure. And then above it, you see this incumbent masonry, and then another change above that. And archaeologists want to say that the Romans did it all. But you can see that there's three different styles, at least in the face here. You can see Roman architecture here, and then you can see that are Hellenistic Greek, and then you have the Canaanitic, the Cydonia here, and then who knows who built this. The legends have it that Cain, the first son of Adam and Eve, built it in a fit of raving madness. But that's the legend there. Now, from this area called Cydonia, the knowledge was brought out into Europe by Europa. And really, she's an important person because she was a princess of Cydonia in the Greek myth. And most people don't realize that her name is why we call Europe Europe. But the story goes that she was abducted from the coast of Cydonia, which is now Lebanon, and she was brought to Crete. And if you go to Crete, you can find all these effigies of women with these big eyes. And you wonder what that's all about. Well, Europa actually means wide eyes, or being able to see really, really well. And interestingly enough, Apis and Appa have a common etymology. They are snake and eyes. This is actually an effigy from Crete. Here, a woman with her eyes open as wide as she can have them, and there's eyes on her little crown here. An owl, which sees really well, in the dark even, and snakes. She's always referred to as a priestess of Crete. Well, Europa, in the myth, came to Crete. She brought this knowledge from Cydonia to Crete. And here, this is a Roman carving of Demeter. Notice the same attitude of the arms and the snakes in the arms. There's definitely some illuminated connections here. And this would be the origin, biblically, the first transfer of heavenly knowledge to a human being by a watcher, which is he, who's also a serpent, interestingly enough. The serpent said to the woman, "You shall surely not die, for God knows in the day that you eat of it, this fruit of knowledge of good and evil, your eyes will be opened," Europa in Greek, "and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." And though Satan was in the guise of a serpent here, being subtle, he is an angel from above, from the heavens. That's a transfer of heavenly knowledge to man on the earth. An amazing coincidence. If you look at all these Renaissance paintings of that actual transfer, you'll notice that there's a commonality between this fruit. And that's because when these were painted, there was no such thing as a golden apple. There was no such cultivar in existence. The only golden apple in existence, which had been understood by the Illuminati, those who knew this understanding of the history of where knowledge came from and where it was going, would always paint it in the same way because it was supposed to be a quince. And a quince has a scientific name, Pyrus Cydonia, the fruit of the heavens. And for all you UFO aficionados, a Zeta Reticuli, a gray, another word for a gray, actually repeating this motif. This is a Greek letter zeta, and in astronomy, the telescope has a reticulum. Now, the reticle is just the crosshairs in your telescope that you sight a star on. It's interesting that the abductees would say, and even channelers would say, well, these grays call themselves Zeta Reticulans. They must come from the Zeta Reticulan system. I submit that they're using this symbology cryptically, inserting these ideas into our subconscious mind, even subconscious culture. We're almost unaware of the fact that these things repeat themselves in a way that's kind of strange to me, because I'm thinking, why would they want to tell us who they are? Because we have a dossier on them. We know what's going on with their past. The world, according to what the Bible says, was destroyed because of their meddling with humanity. Why would they have to continue to use these symbols over and over again? And I submit that it has something to do with the law, the way things work, a hierarchical law. They were made to display things. They're angels. In Hebrew, that's malak. It means to just be a messenger. In Greek, angelos is just messenger. They would give a message from high places to lower places, or go between, from one point to the other. They're designed to do this in this one way, and this one way only. They can't avoid doing the symbolic things that they do any more than we can avoid following the law of gravity. Now, the knowledge of geometry has always been, at least from farthest antiquity, a sacred science. Not just sacred geometry. There's no distinction as you go farther back in time. It's all sacred. And Plato was even able to say that geometry, rightly treated, is the knowledge of the eternal. And why would he say something like that if you just got really smart when we were able to make really good circles and build really straight houses? I don't think it has anything to do with eternity. But it does if you look at it from the idea that it was given from above. And a real good someone studying geometry will understand that. The illuminated fraternities who put such a huge emphasis on geometry understand its origin. That's the major message of geometry to them. And here's how it works. This is how the heavens are even now anchored to the earth. And our first clue is right here in Cydonia, ancient Cydonia, also called Canaan, now called Lebanon, Beirut, a little part of Israel here. It was an actual big place, but it centers around this mountain here, where the first descent of angels came to corrupt mankind with their secret knowledge, according to Enoch. Hermon is called Sirion by the Sidonians. And then if you look at the name Canaan, in Greek, kunon, dog, Canaan, rule. Interesting connection. Latin, caninus, canis, dog, of course. Cana, reed. Canon, law, measurement. It seems like a system of measuring something, a dynamic standard connected to this lowly guy named Canaan. And this is the key. Canis Major, Sirius, the dog star. Now, the reason this is an important star is because in the northern hemisphere, the northern celestial hemisphere, this star is the brightest. There's no other star brighter than this. Now, it's interesting, too, that this symbol here, to the Egyptians, represented Sirius, and especially this little five-pointed kind of starfishy-looking star. You could say it's a pentagon sort of thing. It's got 5 points, a little bit off, but it looks almost anthropomorphic. It always has 5 points. This is Isis. And Diodorus Siculus says, and he's explaining Isis here, I am she who rises in the star that is in the constellation of the dog. Well, that connects this symbol with the idea that this deity that's been renowned as a wisdom deity, as an agrarian teacher, in Egyptian cosmology, a teacher of how to be civilized, of how to do civilization things, how to read, write, make cities, do all the things that you need to do to become civilized. It came from her. Now you go to Mars. And on Cydonia, Mars, and remember Cydonia is just the sun, Sidon is just the son of Canaan. You see the Canaan star again, the biggest edifice ever seen anywhere in this solar system. This thing's almost 2 miles wide. It's about 1,500 feet tall. And you can see the resemblance here, the star of Sirius. And this shows you how far back this pentagram idea goes back to cuneiform from 3,500 BC from Sumer. And another interesting thing about Cydonia on Mars, look where it's located. Prime meridian, 0, where you measure everything from. The standard, Cydonia can be also Canaan. This is where you measure Mars from, at least east and west. And lo and behold, the actual city complex that Hoagland has been talking about for so long, the place where 19.47 seems to show up over and over again, the place that seems to have intelligent design, it's located right on the 0 meridian. Now, how did that happen? Schiaparelli, back in the 1870s, was studying Mars. That prime meridian had already been set up. He was the guy that set this nomenclature over the top of it. He did this deliberately. He was steeped in the occult. You can look up history of him and biographies of him, and you'll find that he was also collaborating with Camille Flammarion and Percival Lowell. You go to seances, they would study the supernatural, and when Schiaparelli's eyesight gave out due to studying Mars so much through his telescope, and they weren't very good in his day, and mapping it, all these surface features are still used today. He wrote a book, a compendium on astronomy in the Old Testament. This is a celestial map from Ptolemy. You'll notice that he has put the prime meridian of this map, this is the entirety of it, right through this dog. Because that dog is actually where Sirius exists. He knows where to put the prime meridian of the celestial globe. Astrologers especially will put the prime meridian of the celestial globe at the first degree of Aries, only because of the precession of the equinoxes, and I get into that later. It makes way more sense to put it right here where the brightest star is. That's how the ancient mariners understood the heavens to work. And if you look at it a little bit closer, you'll actually realize that out of the zodiac, the 12 symbols that we see on our ecliptic, the only 12 that the sun travels through as it goes, or the earth travels as it goes around the sun, and we sight the sun through every year through all these symbols, the 12 signs of the zodiac, Sirius belongs to Gemini. So this is where the prime meridian of the heavens will run, right through Gemini, right through the twins, and right through Sirius, according to Ptolemy, at least. Then here's the Gemini, Castor and Pollux, and where the prime meridian would run, if you're looking at them. And this is something that I find astounding. During the 4th of July, the sun actually rises on that prime meridian. And only on the 4th of July, from only this latitude, 33.33, you can actually have the sun rise to exactly 19.47 degrees, and Sirius will be perfectly on the horizon. Is that why this date is so important? It's a rhetorical question. I think so. Okay, this is just so you believe me. This is a program that I have. You can get them off the internet for a song, but here it is, Sirius, on the horizon. And the sun at 19.47 degrees, the stamp of tetrahedral geometry, right in Gemini, right there. And then, of course, there's the altitude again. 19.5 is a round number of 94.47. I can't really get it to anything more narrow than that. And then, of course, Roswell, New Mexico, 33.33. Now, Roswell actually lies on 33.2, but this is where the crash site is, and I can actually adjust it with my program. And the actual glyph for Gemini, the shorthand glyph in astrology, is pillars. This is Gemini. And that is significant because now we actually can find out how the heavens, if the prime meridian of the heavens is where Gemini is, and Sirius, the pillars then connect the heavens to the earth in some way. And the Greeks explain it. In Homer's Odyssey, he says the Atlas, who was a Titan, the magician, knows the depths of all the seas, and he, no other, guards the tall pillars that keep the sky and the earth apart. And he uses the word pillars here, not pillar. Amazingly, the myth goes that Atlas was holding up the sky, and Perseus came and held the head of Medusa up to him because he wouldn't let him pass, and turned him into mountains. And you actually notice that the only Atlas mountains on our planet are perfectly on our zero meridian. And this is borne out here by some Greek lyric, a fragment from the Etymologicum Magnum. I love saying that. And here it is. This is how the heavens and the earth are connected. This is what the Watchers are trying to tell us. For some very specific reason. The prime meridian, the Atlas Mountains, the mythical Atlas holding the pillars, which are Gemini, where Sirius is the brightest star. It's just fairly logical. Brightest star, prime meridian, where heaven and earth meet, where time and space are measured. Even Albert Magnus, he is highly venerated in Catholic circles, said that all the powers of things below originate in the stars and constellations of the heavens. He's been canonized, actually. He was canonized in like 64 or something, kind of late. And he's studying something here called the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. This is where this comes from. This is a highly occult sort of study he was doing, but he did it under this idea of science. It's a broad general way of getting away with studying the occult back then. And he says the stars and constellations of the heavens are where these things originate, this power from heaven in some way. And all these powers are poured down into the things below by the first circle of the constellations, like I was talking about, the 12 of the zodiac, where we sight the sun. It's called the ecliptic. All the planets move along here. The sun moves along here. The orbit of the planets then are on this plane. So if you take the constellations then of the signs of the zodiac and lay them according to where the prime meridian will anchor them, here, Castor and Pollux at the twins, the pillars, this is how the rest of them look. This is how they're all arranged on the earth in this metaphorical, symbolic way. And this is a circular view of it. Here again, the pillars, Gemini, the star Sirius down here. The heaven-earth map. And this little ticket you can get if you go to the Royal Astronomy in Greenwich. And it says, I thought significantly, the center of time and space. Well, a being that has mastery over time and space is considered a deity, at least in antiquity. And here you have the prime meridian going through Greenwich here, on through England, and there's a location of that crop circle that I started out with, outside of Winchester. 4,983 miles to Roswell. So if you place Gemini, like the prime meridian of heavens is originating with Sirius, in this manner, you end up with the pillars, Gemini, and the dog in this sort of configuration. And lo and behold, these are exactly the same symbols that show up in Roman cosmology. You know, the idea that their founding myth of these twins starting Rome, building Rome. And what they're actually saying here then is this is a religion of the cosmos. This is a religion that was given to them. They're trying to encrypt this information so that it could be understood by those who actually can read the symbols. This is how heaven connects to the earth. But what they're also saying is, these guys are from Mars, because their father was Mars. That connects Mars again in some way with this heavenly knowledge. And here you have Canaan, the canine, and you have the milk of knowledge feeding these guys, the progenitors of Roman culture in myth. Well, I thought it was interesting that if you looked at the crop circle when it was made in August 14th, 2002, that those same motifs, Sirius, which would be the dog star, Mars, and the sun, all showed up on the horizon exactly at the same time. In fact, the sun and Mars were in a cult. They were actually conjuncting, and all these three bodies were rising on the horizon exactly at the same time from the latitude of where this crop circle was made at the time it was made. You might think that these are two coins from Rome, you know, the Capitolian wolf and Romulus and Remus, but they're not. They're separated by almost 1,000 years. This one is from Rome. This one is from Crete. You can see this one guy suckling from a wolf or a dog. But underneath you can see here the word Chidon, a corruption of the name Sidon. Kappa, iota, delta. Read that. Down here it says Roma. This is from Crete, and that's the reason it's from Crete is because there's actually a Cydonia on Crete. And right here at the base of Mount Lucia, which is actually the mountain of the wolf. So when Europa was abducted, all this symbolic understanding of how the heavens were measured and the earth were measured and how it's connected to the earth, all that was given here in this mystery religion. That's where we get the idea of gnosis, meaning knowledge. There's gnosis. It all came from here via Europa and then finally up into the Greek culture. Now, in this heaven-earth matching system, this mirror of how heaven and earth are related, when you talk about the constellations anchored over that, this is from Crete's myth of Theseus dispatching the Minotaur. That looks an awful lot like Orion's placement next to Taurus. And that isn't without precedent because Taurus actually does exist in a 30-degree swath over this whole area, starting about Greece here, all over Crete, Cydonia, all the way out to this line. And that also explains why we have so much myth about Romulus and Remus, the twins, and the dog, because there's Rome right there, right on the edge. Rome is on the Tiber. The Tiber in Latin means the divider, and in fact, the Milky Way divides the zodiac in half. 6 on each side, right through there, right at their feet, and goes right up through there. And you have underneath Taurus, the Taurus Mountains in Turkey. I couldn't make this stuff up, it's just... And here you have Hathor, the cow-headed woman. You can also have Apis, the cow-headed man. It's just a version of Orion, this man, and Taurus, commemorating a position under heavens. Here's Virgo. And the point of this is to get the idea that she's usually depicted with wings. She's a heavenly symbol. She's got a branch in one hand and a sheaf of grain in the other. Here's another picture, same sort of configuration with wings. And look where Virgo lives. This is where she's oriented over the earth, in the heavens. Right over America. Perfectly. Right here. If you'd actually look at where the center part of that would be, and she's pointing to it. This is from a grimoire, illuminated, of course. Or she's pointing to her place on the earth. We commemorate this. This is the center of where Virgo would actually be if you looked at the 30-degree swath that she occupies on the earth. Here's our capital, right, wedged between Virginia and Maryland. These aren't names that are coming out of a hat. These are actually commemorating this. There are illuminated folks involved with the placement of this thing. His own font, the guy who put this thing together, has demonstrated this sacred geometry, if you want to call it that, through the complex of Washington, D.C. over and over and over again. And look at this. We have our most influence and power in our country, the most powerful country. A lot of people want to argue about ever. I don't think so, but at least now we're pretty powerful, having split the atom and all. This is where we house all our war-making factions. Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, all in here. And then you look on Mars, the largest artificial structure on Mars, the symbol of the canine star, the Cydonian star, on the planet of the war god. How can you not see the connection? Now, continuing, it gets really in depth about how the ancients have actually commemorated how the heavens are placed over their countries. And here's Virgo over the earth, and there's Mexico, and this is Hydra and Corvus pecking him. This is Mexico. You'd think that there'd be something there that would commemorate this idea, and you have it. It's their national symbol. Of course, they're using indigenous animals here. This is a hawk instead of a crow and a rattlesnake, which is a reptile that is a lot more popular there. But if you actually look at some other things about Mexico, there's actually some very Martian things happening there too. It was said that the Aztec were told to move from an area up here down to this latitude, 19.47, by their war god, Huitzilopochtli. And he said to just set up camp here whenever you see that symbol of a snake in the talons of a hawk on a cactus. And so they searched for that sign until they found it, and it was right here in the middle of the swamp. And so they set to build their new nice city in the middle of this mosquito-infested swamp, and it took a long time. But why? They called themselves the Chichimec, the sons of the dog. So you're seeing these things repeated again, even across a whole ocean. You actually have this idea of the dog, Mars, measuring the earth, repeating the symbols. I think this is an incredible picture. This is a bilateral symmetry face. We have actually on this side a lion. It's kind of hard to see. I couldn't get a full-on frontal view. And this side's a human. And the archaeologists who found this in Tabasco, Mexico, have said that it actually is depicting the lion-human cult, and this is a person in the act of transforming. But you notice the attitude of the face here looking out into the heavens. It was the Olmec who supposedly carved this thing. And here we have the face on Mars. Notice the strange similarity here between the features that NASA would have you dismiss completely out of hand. I've gone to trouble to actually highlight just exactly how integral the lion eye here and the nose are incorporated into this ancient feature, which I believe has every hallmark of an artificial structure. This, of course, is almost 2 miles wide by almost a mile, 2 miles long by a mile wide. If you continue down to South America, you find Leo dominates the country. If you go to this little city here, Cusco in Peru, you'll find amazing artifacts. This is a megalithic site called Sacsayhuaman. This woman's standing here in front of one of these great walls that were excavated, maybe only about 150 years ago. But right through here are stones that weigh in the 150-ton range, and there's a big enough one here to actually have been estimated at over 300 tons. What she's actually standing in front of is one tooth. Here are the rest of the teeth. in a big jaw of a giant lion that the whole city of Cusco, Peru was built over or into. Here it's a little bit degraded with modern convention, but it's the mouth here with the teeth that you were just looking at, commemorating the lion above them. If you go to Bolivia, which is about a little bit over 100 miles to the east, you'll find a place called Puma Punku here. This is on top of a place called the Antiplano. It is the Altiplano. It is actually about 13,000 feet above sea level. That's more than 2 miles high. The archaeologists who look at this thing say it was built in 200 AD, which is pretty difficult to explain when you talk about megaliths here that weigh up to 440 tons that were transported from a 10-mile away quarry. And they're hewn in andesite, which is incredibly hard. And this is supposedly a dock, a port for ships, even though it's at the altitude of 13,000 feet above sea level right now. It's actually 15 miles away from Lake Titicaca, which name means Lion Cliff. Titicaca does. So you have the Puma Gate and the Lion Cliff in the same area, in an area where no one could grow anything because it's too high, and that supposedly held ships and docks. Here's a picture of the shattered remains of Puma Punku. This is the megalith that weighs around 400 tons. They're shattered and jumbled together like tinker toys. And this has all been uncovered just recently. These are some of the newer excavations. They don't have enough money to really take the overburden off the top of it. But again, a geologist will tell you these are Pleistocene alluvials. And they're not just plain Pleistocene alluvials, they're called marine Pleistocenes, which means they were deposited by salt water. So what you have to ask yourself then is, what are alluvials doing here from the Pleistocene? Because the Pleistocene ended 13,000 years ago. And this looks like some of the most intricate stone laying. I mean, if you look at these pieces of work here, they're hundreds of tons. You can't even insert a knife blade between many of these. They're set with such precision that they're dug down into the bedrock and then multi-facets so that they don't jar loose. What's that doing under waterborne detritus? It's because it's just like Enoch says. There was a global flood. In fact, the people, the Indians of that area, actually were able to get into detail about it. They said that a massive body came close to the earth and that it pulled a tidal bulge of the oceans out with it because the earth captured this body like a moon or a comet in its gravity. And as this orbit decayed, it reached its Roche limit and fragmented, and this huge wall of water, this huge mound that was moving along with this moon was dissipated, and it flowed back towards the poles each direction, and it wiped out their civilization in one night. That's their legend. Now the Watchers, those who've been abducted by the Watchers, many times come back with this idea that the Watchers are saying the Earth's going to be destroyed again. Well, they should know. Enoch says that they're the reason the Earth was destroyed already. But it's interesting that this would be a revelation to those who've been studying Bible prophecy, because when the Messiah comes back, that eschatology talks about disasters unlike men have ever existed through are coming. So it's a no-brainer. But the reason they say this is because they want to convey why all this hoopla about connecting the heavens to the earth. Why are they doing this in this way? What they're trying to tell us with the placement of these megalithic sites, they're talking about precession. They're talking about a clock, a cosmic clock that talks about when the chaos, the destruction, the global decimation will happen again. It's a clock that they're trying to explain to us. They not only have to show us the clock, they have to explain how it works. and this explains it. These megalithic sites have been placed in a configuration around the earth in the manner of a pentagram. Why? If you look at a Cydonia fruit, cut it in half, this fruit that symbolizes knowledge from heaven, it's also pentagonal. In fact, Pythagoras used to, and he's considered the father of many illuminated fraternities, he used to hand his new student apple and a knife. And if the student was worthy of being taught by him, he would cut it along the equator instead of along its axis. It would reveal a perfect pentagram inside. And the secret then that he just revealed would be the secret of precession. The precession of the equinox is a ill-understood function of the heavens, but it's integral to understanding how this heaven to earth knowledge works and what the watchers are trying to tell us. They're trying to get the scoop on the idea that there's going to be a cataclysm coming. They want to be able to tell mankind with this knowledge from heaven, we're in charge. We're your progenitors. We're the guys who are in control of this earth. We have been before. We're going to warn you through these various means. They're kind of doing this distraction technique, which is interesting, but here you have the equations, real simple, 72 degrees between each one of these points, and in the 360-degree circle, a system where you measure a circle by 360, you end up with the exact number it takes to go through one cycle of the precession. That is, every year, the sun will rise just a little bit farther along the signs of the zodiac, the 12. It takes 72 years to move 1 degree. So 360 degrees times 72, you get 25,920 years. Well, that's like the first hand of the clock, the hour hand, say. It's the major hand, it's the slow hand of the clock that they're talking about, the great celestial clock of doom. And you can actually see this precessional number incorporated into the latitude of the crop glyph, the Crabwood crop glyph, in 19.47. There is exactly 2,160 miles between these two latitudes, as a crow flies, even over the curvature of the earth. That's how exact it gets. 2,160 is exactly the number of years it takes to move through one sign of the zodiac. Just for the heck of it, I decided to divide that number by pi, because it seemed to be something that the crop circle, the watchers were showing, and lo and behold, the number you get is exactly the number of days in a Martian year. This is connected to the Earth, though. We're talking about how many solar days in the Earth it would take to equal a Martian year. And then in addition, I didn't put this up because it wasn't quite as significant, if you subtract 333 from that, you get exactly the number of days in a lunar year. Okay, well, in addition to this idea of precession of the equinoxes, there are 4 cardinal points to the ecliptic. Here's the 12 signs of the zodiac are aligned on here, but there are 4 cardinal points as the stars. The brightest ones on the ecliptic are in these constellations: Leo, Ophiuchus, Aquarius, and Taurus. And that is a signature of a cherubim. Now, this is a symbol that many who study history will realize have been around for a long time. And they're a huge part of an insight or a symbol for the angelic beings in the Old Testament. They had 4 faces, Ezekiel talks about. Well, there's 4 cardinal points to the ecliptic. If you combine them all together, you get this unique little animal here. And this one is an ivory from, it escapes me, but there's a head here, a human head, 4 paws of a lion, eagle wings, and the back part supposedly of a bull. The bull tail is up instead of down, so they believe that it's a bull. It has all the hallmark and stamp of an angelic being, which seems almost like a paradox. If the watchers are angels, but angels are in the Bible as being good guys, what's the difference? Well, there are moral alignments with angels. There are those who've decided they will do what God wants. There's those who have actually been corrupted, along with the greatest angel, the greatest cherub, whoever was in existence, who was corrupted by his own beauty. And now we have this interesting sort of moral conflict going on, and you see the motifs of this. It's the center of the Ark of the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was held, the very most holy object that the Hebrews had. These guys are guarding it. The same symbols are on the top of the Ark. It's all about something to do with this conflict. The heavens, the angels, humanity. As a side note, the guy who built all this stuff in Solomon's temple was from Cydonia. Hiram of Tyre, he was the king of Cydonia. He didn't call himself king of Tyre, he called himself the king of the whole country, and you actually look in the Bible and you can find Cydonia as being the name that they would use. It was also known as Phoenicia by the Greeks, but that's kind of a derogatory term too, because Phoenicia just means red men. The red men came from there, and there's conjecture over it was maybe the dye industry dyed these guys who, when they would go and trade with the Greeks, they'd have all this purple dye on their hands and stuff. But I think it has a lot more to do with the idea that Mars was part of their culture. Mars, their red planet. And even the face on Mars has some precedent in the Bible. It's in Ezekiel 41, 18, and 19. The panels of the holy place, and this is talking about a temple that doesn't exist yet, in Jerusalem, were made with cherubims and palm trees. So the palm tree was between cherub and a cherub, and every cherub had two faces, so that the face of a man was towards the palm tree from one side, and the face of a young lion toward the palm tree on the other side. It was made throughout the house, and that's exactly what we have here. According to the research that Hogan's been doing, and according to this precedent that's been set out, defining cherubs, defining what's going on Mars. Hogan told me that it was a very strange thing I had, this idea that there's angelic civilizations somewhere, or that they existed, that they'd ever manipulate anything into a structure. But the Bible actually says that's exactly what they did. In fact, they taught men civilization. They were the ones that caused humanity to build their greatest edifices. That's just basic. Now this would be the second part of the great cosmological clock, the great the great clock of doom in the heavens. This word in Hebrew, Leviathan. This is a talisman from Eliphaz Levi. He's obviously illuminated, but this word is Hebrew and actually exists in the Old Testament. And he has it circumscribing a pentagram. So you have this symbol here of the procession, because that's what this symbol is, a cryptic thing of. And this outside of it, there's an addition to it. Leviathan here, he has resolved a little bit clearer with a snake eating its tail. And the reason he has done that is because Leviathan in Hebrew actually means a serpent that's joined together. You can see serpents joined together. In antiquity, a lot of esoteric sort of occult lore. This is actually a New Year's card, so it's associated with the turnover of the new year. You can see here in Hebrew, Leviathan, Happy New Year. Always a serpent or a fish eating its tail. It's a big part of the clock in the heavens because this is the Milky Way. And it's orientated this way around the ecliptic. So this would be the star, the major hand of this clock. And this will be the lesser hand, which will resolve the hour with a greater clarity. And here it is. This is Leviathan. Here's the head of the snake right here, the tail going into his mouth, his body. You can look at it a little bit clearer here. The tail going into the mouth. And this actually is galactic central point. This is how you read the clock of doom. The cardinal points of the heavens where the cherubim occupy, the sign, they don't actually occupy it, but the symbol of them are here. The lion, the bull, the Aquarius, the man, and Ophiuchus right here. Right before you hit these cardinal points, you'll actually be able to bisect the whole zodiac twice. And one point here cuts it in half along where the Milky Way is. So you notice, if you have the precession actually taking 25,920 years to go once around, quarterly, when it hits these cherubim points, these cardinal points, it takes 6,480 years. That's just quartering up to the precessional year. What happens then is that when these signs are aligned to either the equinoxes or the solstices of our year, then we hit what's called the end or the beginning of an aeon. The Greeks actually had a time for the aeon. The aeon to us sounds like an ethereal long stretch of time, but the aeon to the Greeks was actually this amount of time, 6,480 years. So you could move through here to here. When that happens, and you're actually on a solstice or an equinox, you know, you get up in the morning, the sun's rising right here between Pisces and Aquarius, you know there's something big is going to happen. And in fact, that's exactly what's happening now. This is what it looks like. If you get up on December 21st, winter solstice, the sun will rise right there in the mouth of this Leviathan, also called an Ouroboros. Rise right in the center of galactic central point. Crosses right through here. This is the ecliptic. All the planets cross right through this most holy site of the heavens, according to the ancients. And you can see here, this is Sagittarius pointing right to the mouth here. Right before you get to where the proper symbol of Ophiuchus, the serpent holder, would be here. The Greeks would call this actual configuration a syntelia, which means the dividing point. Now, this maps out the dividing points. We're presently in one. They last for around, 200 years. I just picked 2012 because it seems to be a popular time for doomsayers and people who read the Aztec calendar. But if you count back from here, you actually start at the birth of history, 6,480 years, jump back again, the Pleistocene, where all these sites, these megalithic sites, seem to have been destroyed by water, which fits perfectly into the idea of Noah's epic, the flood epic right here. Go back again, 6,480 years, glaciers at a maximum, sea levels below 400 feet lower than present. And then you go back before that, another 6,480 years, at the beginning of this whole precessional cycle, which will end there or thereabouts, because like I said, it's around 200 years while this sign is being displayed. You see that all humanoids, at least in paleontology, all Homo sapiens died out and the last glacial period began. So this guy, this symbol, Sagittarius, is actually pointing his arrow at galactic central point. He points at the arrow where Leviathan connects. And if you don't know what Leviathan was, you wouldn't think that was so significant, but actually knowing where the tail goes into the mouth of this thing at galactic central point, it's very significant to have this arrow pointing right at it. And those in antiquity who knew things actually realized that about Sagittarius. This comes from an actual tapestry in France made about 1500s. They incorporated Leviathan here in galactic central point with the body of Sagittarius. But this, I think, is really fascinating. The most ancient depiction of Sagittarius is Nergal, the god of Mars, to the Sumerians. And this is an artist rendition, actually my brother painted that, of this face in profile. And here's a close-up of Nergal's face in profile. Notice he has two faces. Some say this is a lion. It looks more like a wolf to me. It would still be kind of significant. But he's a cherubim. This back end here, this is a cow. This is a bovine. The front, these are paws of a lion, wings of an eagle, and human four parts like a human. So he fits a classic design of a cherubim but he's called the god of Mars by the Sumerians, and he bears this uncanny similarity to the face on Cydonia. Well, Enoch comes to the rescue again, explaining what's going on now in modern times. You have the alien grays, you have what people would say are Zeta Reticuli, or watchers. Enoch explains what's going on with them. He was actually told to explain to them themselves by God what their punishment would be. And he goes on saying here in Enoch 6, the dwelling of the spirits who were born on earth is earth. They are called demons. They eat no food, do not thirst, and are not observed. As Dr. Heiser was talking about yesterday, the Semitic, the Hebrew belief of where the origin of demons come from is that they were the giants that were destroyed in the flood. Enoch fits that here in this sentence. And then he says, but the dwelling of the watchers, the spirits of heaven who were promiscuous with women, is heaven. They, assuming many forms, and that's a salient part there, will lead men astray so that they sacrifice to demons as gods until the great judgment day, until the time of the consummation of their sin. This is the central point of contention. I wanted to add, when Dr. Heiser was talking yesterday about what defines divinity, what defines a divine being, and I was thinking, could it just be living forever? Immortality? I mean, they are different than humans, and they don't live on the earth. They have interaction with us on the earth. But I think what defines, really simply, in a way, a divine being, an angel, is that they are eternal. They weren't always eternal. They were created at one point like human beings, but they have eternal life already. And this is where the contention all started. This knowledge was brought down from heaven by this being, a watcher, the consummate watcher. This fruit, well, I'm showing, has this connection to Mars through symbology, through occult literature, through history, the Cydonia fruit, symbolizing knowledge from heaven. Incrementally showing us more and more on how to become civilized, how to somehow overtake this curse of being prevented from ever living forever. And then you have, and I use the same phraseology here, I actually picked this because the words are actually the same. There's the tree of life, I guess, metaphorically. I mean, I don't have access to this literal tree back in Genesis in the Garden of Eden. But I do have access to understanding this. And metaphorically, I understand this connection. I'm understanding what this is trying to tell me about if I gather more knowledge, if I have more gnosis, someday maybe I'll be able to breach that point between mortality and immortality. I think that's what the contentious point is. I think that's the thing that divides and actually defines what the argument is between the angels who've rebelled and the angels who haven't. What's going on with mankind here right now. This could be metaphorically the tree of life because I can actually take part with this. I can actually go to this. And that's a promise that I've been given as a Christian, that I'll live forever because I trusted what God himself did on this cross, paying for all my sin, all my imperfection. And I think this one sentence says it most clearly. I think this one sentence, and it comes out of the New Testament, but I think it clears up exactly what's going on between angels, the angelic realm, the rebellious angelic realm, and humanity. As it says, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God might be made known to the principalities and powers in the heavenly places, according to the eternal purposes which he purposed in the Messiah, Jesus our Lord. This is a display for them. With this information, no one can actually say, well, the Bible discounts beings in outer space. What this is actually saying is, what's happening on earth is for their benefit. It's showing them something. It's not all human-centric. It's actually a demonstration on this one planet of something so phenomenal that you could expect a lot of watchers from heavenly realms. Well, thank you very much for your time. I don't know how long I went over, but if there's any questions, we can put them down on the card. Thank you. We can put them down on the card, and then we'll try to address them during the question and answer session, I think, on Monday. Thanks.
All right, we've got Mike Heiser at 5:30.